All right, Dr. Kruse, thank you for being here. Would you like to give us a introduction for your talk today?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, my name's Carter Kruse. I work for an organization called Turner Enterprises, which is a name that's typically known in the bison or buffalo world. Um, and, and I have worked here for about 26 years this summer now. My background is in natural resources management and ecology, specifically more aquatic ecology, and I have that was the role I started with Turner Enterprises, and have over the years kind of broadened my responsibilities and now kind of coordinate and lead our land ops and research divisions or programs, I guess is a better word for it, and natural resource programs within Turner Enterprises. And I'll give a little bit more background about what that means or entails. But just a fun fact: I grew up near Jamestown, North Dakota, where the Bison Center is at by the big concrete buffalo there. We called it. And my mom and dad actually met in that building when it was the wetlands project office for the Fish and Wildlife Service way back in the day. So it's now been repurposed as the museum and foundation center there. But so have some roots back there. It's always fun for me when I go home to go up to the center there and have a look around and see how it's changed and what's been added. But anyway, feel free, those that are listening now, feel free to ask any questions along the way. I do not have a lot of in-depth material prepared, but thought I would just give you a background and on Turner Enterprises and what we've tried to do through the years, specifically within the bison industry, and then see where we're at from there. Does that sound good?
That's perfect.
Okay. Well, if you haven't heard of Turner Enterprises, it was an organization started by Mr. Ted Turner, who recently passed away. He's always had a passion for bison. Owned some early on when he had properties on the East Coast, but in the late '80s started to invest and purchase large ranches in the Western United States. Primarily, I think, motivated early on by recreational opportunities. He was a sportsman and an outdoorsman, and bought his first ranches in Montana and New Mexico in the late '80s and then into the early '90s. But soon realized that he could implement his passion of bison conservation and bison ranching on those landscapes and begin to purchase and populate his properties with of course North American plains bison. And then as he moved into maybe more of the late '90s, early 2000s, really focused on his land purchases on places that would be good for bison grazing and bison production and bison conservation. So ultimately ended up with about 2 million acres of land in North America, mostly spread across the West, Montana, New Mexico, Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota were the core areas where the properties were. And I came to work for the company in 2000. Again, as I said, from an aquatics background, and I'll get into the conservation focused in a little bit. But so one of the primary drivers again was bison production and conservation. We peaked at probably 50 to 55,000 head of bison, but in more recent years have implemented drought management strategies and things like that. So we stock our ranches fairly lightly so we can be reactive when we have low precipitation years. So now we probably manage around 40 to 45,000 head of animals. And thankfully, like this year in some areas of our network, we had a real mild winter. We've had poor spring moisture, and we're worried about summer drought and forage production. So we lightly stock the property so we can ride through those times or react proactively to drought and not have to overgraze our properties. But so that was a primary focus that I'll come back to. But I also want to point out that Mr. Turner had a huge conservation interest, conservation of native species and imperiled species. He formed the Turner Endangered Species Fund in 1998. and tasked that organization with working on imperiled species on his properties, on and around his properties. So that's been probably the largest and foremost private endeavor on behalf of native and imperiled species in the world. And there's a long list of species and habitats that the Turner Endangered Species Fund and associated, like the Turner Biodiversity Divisions, which is another piece of the organization that have worked on over the years. Some controversial, like prairie dogs and gray wolves. Others not so much, like Bison tortoises and cutthroat trout. But a long list of successes in terms of habitat management and native species reintroductions, as well as a few failures. So it's been for me, that's been near and dear to me, because that's how I came into the organization. But ultimately, bison are the biggest conservation project, right? And really a lot of our projects stem around bison, grassland habitat, bison, grazing bison in a way that promotes the health of the landscape, and ultimately then promotes wildlife and imperiled species, and so on. So as we move into maybe more present day, as I said, Mr. Turner recently passed away. He had a plan in place. He wants to keep his properties operating much like they have in the past. But he also gave his heirs and family some flexibility in that plan to have some self-determination in how they lead and lead our organization moving forward. So we are currently making that transition right now as they settle his estate and things like that. But the important piece of that is that he established the Turner Institute for Eco-Agriculture recently. That came into being legally in 2022, the last part of 2022. And what that is a organization that he will donate many of his properties to. He's donated one prior to his death. He donated the McGinley Ranch in Nebraska to the Turner Institute of Eco-Agriculture. And the underlying premise of that is it's an agriculture research organization. It'll be a not-for-profit organization that is focused on conducting agricultural research. And we'll do that in conjunction with land-grant universities and other research partners. So the long-term objective and goal of our organization is we will make this transition, continue to operate properties as bison ranches and areas of conservation, but with a new charitable focus of conducting agriculture research, or eco-agriculture research as we call it, in three primary areas. Again, bison production and management, native and imperiled species conservation, and then long-term ecological outcomes of land management decisions, which is something that I'm really excited about, because it's often research centers and research organizations and universities do research in fairly small packages, like you think about a graduate student or something, a master's or PhD student, which are often the vehicles of research at universities, are 2 to 3 to 4 year bites. And we hope to be a kind of a long-term ecological research program, looking at, again, grazing and land management outcomes and habitat and endangered species. So anyway, with that background, I'm curious if there's a certain topic that anybody wants to explore further, or if there's any questions or any more development that I need to do on any one area.
So we'll pause there for a second. And I know we have quite a few people here in the conversation. So if there's a question that you would like to ask Dr. Turner, or anything you would like him to elaborate on, just raise your hand, or you can pop it in the chat and I will unmute you. I'll give it just a second here. I have some questions, but I don't want to interrupt anybody who's taken the time to hop on today. All right, so I have a question, and this may be a fairly broad one. So if you don't have a super well-defined answer, that's fine. But you've mentioned that some of the research, that you're hoping to conduct is more of having more of a long-term focus, and more specifically related to bison. Are there any big questions or any big topics that Turner Enterprises is hoping to address with this future research, or maybe something that you are working on now that you think is interesting to note?
Yeah, great question. I'll answer it a couple ways. One is, so we've always done research. It's always been part of our DNA because bison are a pretty novel creature, actually, in terms of the ranching community, and as well as trying to understand how do you conserve an animal like that on a highly managed landscape. And I think if you're aware of like the American prairie effort in central Montana, the politics and the controversy that can come with restoring an animal like the bison, not unlike the wolf or the grizzly bear, where there's they need big landscapes. They're big and they can move around, and they can interrupt infrastructure and things like that. There's lots of opinions and feelings on that. So I would say, understanding how privately owned bison in like ranching herds contribute to the overall conservation of the species is something we're very interested in. That can start from each individual animal is a genetic unit. That's important. There's something that popped into the chat there I didn't quite catch, but yeah, so you can look at genetics and their ecology and all those sorts of things from a conservation perspective, the political spectrum and things like that. So that's an area of interest. When we were forming the institute, one of the questions we looked at was the bison ranching or the bison production industry, that sector of the agriculture industry was made claims about the health of the meat and cholesterol, fat, things like that. And I asked, what was that based on? Where is the research that provided that? And when you dig into that, there wasn't a lot of depth to that, certainly not compared to other protein markets, that have done, cattle, for example, has had voluminous amounts of research done on the nutrition and things like that. So one of our goals early on was to conduct some meat studies that would bolster or back up, any claims that the bison industry made in terms of the health of the product, the human health outcomes of the product and things like that. So we've done several projects now on carcass quality and nutritional profiling of the meat, and are moving into things like, is the meat are the meat characteristics, the nutritional profile of the meat affected by the sex of the animal, by where they were grazed, by the type of forage they had, really looking at some of those more nuanced outcomes. There's a term called metabolomics now. It's more of the nutrient profile, but you can look at now the vitamin and mineral profiles of the meat, fatty acid profiles, and all those sorts of things that people are becoming interested in and affect human health. So that's one area of research that we're working on. Another, again, back to the long-term ecological outcomes, would be, how do you manage a grazing animal? And this wouldn't be necessarily unique to bison, but since our organization raises bison, how do you manage a grazing animal in a way to accomplish positive outcomes on the landscape? So there's a term out there now called regenerative agriculture, regenerative ranching. And I'll just be honest, and I'll probably regret saying this if more than 10 or 12 people look at this later, but I'm a little ambivalent or even a little concerned about that term, especially regenerative ranching, regenerative agriculture, because I think right now sometimes there are claims being made that the science hasn't necessarily borne out yet. I hope it does. I think there's a lot of great concepts in that term, regenerative agriculture, regenerative ranching. But one thing I could see us doing is I think a lot of ecological outcomes like soil health and changes in vegetative community, changes in water infiltration, carbon storage, all of these things that we would consider positive outcomes of land management, of good land management, take years to decades to be able to come to fruition or to see results. So that's where I could see us spending a lot of time on Turner properties and surrounding landscapes with partners is looking at, are we seeing improvements in the bird community? Are we seeing improvements in soil health when you make certain actions on the landscape? People call them climate smart strategies or regenerative agriculture or all of these things. But I think the science needs to catch up in some ways with the claims moving forward. So those are a few areas that I'm really excited that I think we can contribute in moving forward as a research institute.
Awesome. Thank you. And that was a fantastic response. And I certainly have more follow-up questions I can ask as well, but we do have 2 questions in the chat here. One is from Steve, who said, are you selling calves, yearlings, auctions, private treaty meat?
Great question. Yes. And I can get into our production chain a little more. So we are of that, let's just call it a 45,000 head herd that we have distributed across 12 or 13 properties in the Intermountain West. Marketing, 8 to 10,000 animals a year. That would include everything from what we call, standard cows, which are, turnover in our herds, and we would call it standard or premium. Premium would be the younger animals that are desirable in the meat market, and the standard are more of the grind animals like our cull cows and things like that. So we're entering all of those kind of market sectors. We sell about 50-50 into a grain-fed versus a grass-fed type of marketing program. So we have marketing, partners in those areas that buy animals from the grain-fed market. Those are primarily premium animals that are fed, heifers and bulls that are in the prime age from 24 to 38 months, depending on when they entered the feedlots or the feeding facilities and when they get slaughtered. And then we have the grass finished animals that come straight out that are by definition never given a grain seed and come right off the grass of our pasture. So it's about a 50-50 split right now. And that is probably 6,000 to 8,000 head a year of those premium animals, and then the remainder of what we would market would be the standard or non-premium animals, which would be extra cows and bulls that are coming out of our system, and mostly going to a grind market for that. But I'm not sure I answered the entire question. Can you read the question again?
Sure. So it was, are you selling calves, yearlings, auctions, private treaty meat?
Okay. Thank you. We do not have our own private label meat line. We sell the processors. That was an intentional decision by our organization and Mr. Turner that we wanted to, as we built our bison herd, he wanted to support the bison industry, and he felt he could do that by helping processors. And I guess I don't need to name them here, but the processors that buy our product buy product from other people as well. They buy animals from other producers as well, and we felt that was really an important way to help support the bison industry and other bison producers. So we do that. We rarely sell calves. We will sometimes sell calves if we just, for instance, in New Mexico right now, it's really dry, and we've been taking our herd numbers down. And in that case, we will sell a few calves if that's a way we can get animals off of the range. But typically we keep all our animals until they're yearlings, 2-year-olds, and then start to meter those into our own feeding facilities. We used to contract out feeding for a lot of our animals that went into the grain-fed market. We experienced fairly high death losses in those feeding facilities because they were often in pens right next to beef cattle. and all of our bison are marketed under a drug, an antibiotic and hormone-free label. So they could not therapeutically give, antibiotics to prevent disease outbreaks or sicknesses. So oftentimes while they were treating the cattle right next door, something would spill over into the bison and we couldn't therapeutically treat them. So we about probably closer to 15 years ago decided that we would feed all our own animals on our ranches. The benefits of that are they stay close to home, so they're not changing environment. Like we have 2 feeding facilities in Nebraska. We have 5 ranches in Nebraska. So all of our animals produced in Nebraska can be moved. They don't have to move very far. They stay in Nebraska, same climates, and that's less stressful on them. We give them more space than a typical feedlot, and we give them a free choice menu type of ration instead of a mixed ration that you experience in a lot of commercial feedlots. And our death loss is now less than 1%. It's pretty much background noise, which has been huge in terms of the economic side of things as well as animal welfare side of things. So rarely sell calves. We feed all of our own animals, either grass or grain fed. So we're marketing to our processing partners, those fed animals and the occasional what we would call standard or call animals, the adult animals. I think that mostly answered the question.
Great. I think so too. And Steve, feel free to chime back in if there's any lingering questions that you had there. Next in our list of questions, Robin wanted to know, in your career, has there been a fire to the scale of the March fire in Nebraska? Are there now projects you can pursue now that the landscape has changed?
Oh, that's a great question. And somebody that knows what happened for sure in the sandhills there. We have never experienced a fire of that scale on a Turner property. Certainly we have experienced fires of that scale near Turner properties or partially on Turner properties. We've had several thousand acres burned in New Mexico as part of a 250,000 acre complex fire in New Mexico, for example, twice already in the last 15 years in southern New Mexico. But we've never experienced an event like that in our plains ranches. We lost, as part of the Morel fire, which I think ended up around 750,000 acres in western Nebraska. We lost pretty much our entire Blue Creek Ranch, which is about an 80,000 acre property. I think when it was all said and done, we had about 5,000 acres of unburned ground. It's been hard. We've had one thing about bison is that it's not as easy to come and go out of the market. I mean, it's not that easy for cattle producers to do it, and it's even harder for bison producers because they reproduce a year or 2 later than a typical cattle operation would find. There's not the numbers in the marketplace, so you can't dispose of a herd and then buy them back quickly. So oftentimes, if you have to depopulate a ranch of bison, it'll take 5 to 10 to 15 years even to grow your herd back to the size of what you had before. So at Blue Creek, for example, we've got about 1,200 breeding cows on that ranch. We are feeding them purchased forage right now because we did not have enough grass left to support them, and they're going into their breeding season now. And we haven't gotten any spring rain. I think in the last week, we finally got what we would consider a significant moisture event at Blue Creek Ranch. But most of the ranch was still bare sand and blowing sand since the fire. So it's been a difficult run. We've been having to hay the animals at cost. In terms of opportunities, I would say there's a few. We actually had, prior to that fire, had been in contact with a company called Holganics, who is producing, and I'm not endorsing them here. That's just the name of the company. Maybe I'll ultimately endorse them, but they produce a soil amendment product that is growing in scope. It's mostly used on agricultural lands in lieu of like synthetic or commercial fertilizers. It's designed to help the soil biology and increase fertility of soils in that way. They had never done much experimentation on whether the product could enhance rangelands. And we had been talking about them about doing that sort of research through our institute, and the fire at Blue Creek provided an opportunity for us to kind of move that forward faster. And so we've applied some of their product on some of the burned acreage to see if there's a difference in recovery between the area where we've put this product on versus the areas we don't put the product on. So that's one small, advantage from a research perspective or a knowledge perspective. The ranch manager was really circumspect after it happened. He said, look, when we first fenced this property and designed the pastures and the water, there's probably some things we should have done differently because we've learned a lot since then. So now all the fences, or a lot of the fences, are burned up and have to be replaced. So he'll get to redesign the grazing system, the pasture layout at Blue Creek Ranch. And he actually was looking forward to that, to reset Blue Creek Ranch a little bit. It has tasked us with examining our preparedness and responsiveness for an event like that. So we're getting additional training for our employees. We're looking at different equipment and in ways that we can help the broader community as well. So there were some silver linings that came out of it, but no, I had never. We as an organization, and I personally, had never experienced something like that. And when I went to visit the ranch after it happened, it looked like the moon. So it was pretty significant.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. That was a great response. The next question is from Susan. How does or how will the Turner Research Institute interact with the Center of Excellence in Bison Research Studies at SDSU?
Hi, Susan. I think we've interacted before. Good to see you on. That's a great question. And some would ask why the Turner Institute of Eco Agriculture and the Center of Excellence, because Turner's was a big supporter of the Turner of Excellence, and we put, especially our vet, Dr. Dave Hunter, former vet Dave Hunter, put a lot of effort into getting the Center of Excellence its legs under it. We are working very closely with the center. Most of the meat projects I mentioned early on have already we funded research professionals at South Dakota State University through the Center of Excellence. Dr. Amanda Blair has been a great partner there. And we've funded several other projects through the center. And I now sit on the board of the center as a non-voting member. I wasn't officially, there isn't a seat for the Turner Institute of Eco Agriculture, but I worked with Dr. Christy Kamak, the director of the center, and we thought that there'd be a lot of benefit if the institute, the Turner Institute of Eco Agriculture, had a non-voting seat on the board, so we could have close communication with the Center of Excellence and work on projects that we both wanted to work on together, as well as not step on each other if they wanted to go in a certain research direction, and then we wanted to pursue a certain research direction as well. So there's a lot of mutual conversation and back and forth, and ultimately the institute will, I think, unless something really changes, will continue to partner with and collaborate with the Center of Excellence, at least for the rest of my career with Turner's, and I see that going on for a long time. And we actually have a research MOU, or memorandum of understanding, with South Dakota State University that specifically calls out that potential partnership between the Center of Excellence and the Turner Institute of Eco Agriculture. So really synergistic partners, I think.
I'm guessing you answered the question well, because we got a thumbs up from Susan, so that's good. I will pause for a second if anybody else has questions they want to pop in the chat. If not, I can ask a couple of my own. How many ranches, from Steve? How many ranches and employees?
Great, thanks, Steve. Currently, there are what I would consider 14 large ranches in the portfolio. There are 2 in central South Dakota, Bad River Ranch and Standing Butte Ranch. There's 5 in the Sandhills of Nebraska: Spike Box, Fawn Lake, Deer Creek, McGinley, and Blue Creek. Blue Creek was the one I talked about, experienced the fire. There's 3 in New Mexico: Vermeil Park Ranch, Ladder Ranch, Armendaris Ranch, 2 in Montana: Flying D Ranch and Snowcrest Ranch. And there also are a handful of properties on the East Coast that are less a part of what has been our bison producing ranches, but one, Avalon in North Florida, will become part of the Institute for Ecoagriculture, and it'll be a different type of research focus. We were informed last week that the family has made the decision that they will sell the 2 southern New Mexico ranches, so the Ladder and Armendaris ranches, which have never been big bison producing ranches. They've always had just a few hundred head total on them. They've been a bigger part of our conservation and biodiversity portfolio, but the family, for a host of reasons that make a lot of sense, have decided they'll sell those 2. So we'll have 12 core ranches as we move into the Institute. And each ranch has, 3 to 5 employees. If it doesn't have other program areas on it. Vermeil Park Ranch, if you've heard of that one, is a huge place. It's over 500,000 acres, 550 some thousand odd acres in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. Has a hospitality program that was possible because when Mr. Turner purchased that property, it had been owned by Pennzoil and other companies before that used the ranch as an opportunity to entertain guests and employees and things like that. So there was already a large lodge in place and significant outbuildings and things like that. So we have maintained and grown that hospitality business. It's branded as Ted Turner Reserves, and people can pay to come stay there. So they have a much larger, probably 60 or 70 full-time employees and a lot of seasonal employees that help manage that. But our standard bison ranch, for example, in Nebraska, would typically have a property manager and 2 to 3 other full-time employees that help manage the animals and maintain the infrastructure. And they don't have and then we have a separate natural resource program where there's 8 to 10 biological staff that work across the ranches. So I would say as a ranching organization, if you include those other program areas that maybe are a little bit unique to us, the natural resource folks and the hospitality folks, we're about 100 to 110 employees strong, probably.
Great, thanks. That was a good question and a good answer. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, so one of the questions that I had was, while you're talking here, and I think this is part of a larger discussion that folks have when it comes to bison in North America, which is that, they're one of the few species that are kind of in this weird nexus of conservation and also food production. I think Turner Enterprises, as well as others, have done a really good job of demonstrating that those aren't necessarily opposing things and that they can, work kind of in tandem with each other. So how does Turner Enterprises kind of balance those different priorities as they exist right now?
That's a great question. And I, coming up through the natural resources area, I've tried to think of another example in natural resource management where you would have that kind of odd combination of what Mr. Turner used to always say: to save it, you got to eat it. Which is, it's always it's stuck in my mind since the first time I heard him say that. But maybe salmon to some degree, but the genetic breeding of farmed fish has almost made them even though they're the same species, they're very different individuals because they grow way faster and things like that. But that's really the only other one I could think of. But we have a lot of internal discussion about that and sometimes disagreement. I mentioned conservation of bison, and some would hold that you're not conserving the species if you don't give them a large landscape and allow them to run wild as a wild animal would, like maybe more of American Prairie's vision. But even there, regardless of how big a landscape they are able to put together, they're still going to have fences around the outside of it, and the bison won't be able to move as freely as they would have historically. So there's a lot of debate about what conservation and restoration of bison really means in North America. It is a difficult species, and we are right now working on, what does bison conservation mean to Turner Enterprises and ultimately the Turner Institute of Ecoagriculture, because we do need to suss some of that out. And so really how I'm looking at it and trying to lead that conversation is, can we use our properties to conserve and allow some of those wild traits to be maintained, even though we have to confine them with a fence. And then we also have the economic pressures that we need to sell them to produce revenue so that we can maintain ourselves. So I'm looking at it from a gradation. Can we designate some ranches as ones that we are more hands-off in our management? So hands-off would be, you don't wean the calves, you let the mothers wean the calves, you have more natural bull to cow ratios, the bigger pastures, you allow more freer movement, things like that. All of those things come at a cost from an economic perspective. So then we would have other ranches that we would be more focused on production, where we would manage a lot of those things to produce as many young animals a year as we could, and ultimately try to, we have maybe we have the luxury of being able to do that because we have multiple properties with multiple large herds. But that's kind of how we're looking at it, understanding that we don't have wild herds, and people might think, well, you're not really conserving them then. And the other end is the zoos, right? Zoos have a huge role in conservation of species, and ultimately that boils down to keeping individuals of that species alive so that we can continue to breed and have the genetics that would allow ultimately restoration in the wild. And I view every one of our animals as an important genetic unit that can contribute to conservation. So we're looking at the genetics of our herds, and we, for example, it's a long story that I won't get into unless somebody wants the background, but we have animals that were sourced from Yellowstone National Park. We keep those animals in a separate herd. We're managing them differently, and we're watching the genetics of those to make sure we don't cross any of our other herd, animals into that herd, and we maintain that kind of unique Yellowstone genetic lineage. And ultimately, for instance, our current vet, Dr. Tom Bragg, some of you may know, is in a larger group that's just getting organized to look at, how can we use private herds and public herds and work together from a conservation perspective, especially from a genetic perspective. Like if somebody needs, some genetic diversity, is there a herd available that you could move a bull from or some cows from to improve the genetic diversity of a tribal herd or a national park herd or something like that? So those are some of the ways we're trying to contribute, but it's imperfect for sure.
That was really interesting. Thank you. I will pause for another second just for more questions to come in if there are any. So I will ask kind of another big picture question, because I think we've had a lot of really good, procedural questions here as well. So hopefully it's balanced for folks. When we think about, bison conservation and production, you've mentioned some of them already, but what are some of the biggest challenges that Turner Enterprises and just bison at whole, I think, are up against? And feel free to get as detailed or not as you'd like.
Sure, I'll try to click through them. The ones that come to mind anyway. The easy one is disease. Mycoplasma, of course, for those that are in the industry, has been really, really tough on the bison industry recently. So our institute, again, is investing in some research on, trying to understand that disease and detection of that disease and management of the disease. But certainly, disease, and if you're in an industry that mostly it's not, I think there are some folks that do treat animals with antibiotics and things like that, which is totally their choice, and they can market, they market to their they're partners, but all our animals go to marketing partners that market their meat as, antibiotic free and hormone free. So it's not when you have a disease outbreak. First off, it's a species that's not as well understood as other proteins, so we don't know how they react and carry certain diseases. And then when we do have an outbreak like mycoplasma, the treatment of it is really, really difficult. So that is a headwind. For us, I would just say some other headwinds are the market size and opportunities. It still is a niche market in a lot of ways, even though, I've heard, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard that all the bison slaughtered in North America, which by USDA reports, I think was, 70 or 80,000 animals in the last calendar year. That doesn't include all the private sales and smaller slaughterhouses and things, but wouldn't keep one or two McDonald's going. So it's a pretty small market overall. So when you lose a customer or a processing partner or things like that, you can't just turn around and find another one. So just the market size, there's headwinds to that. The animal itself is it's slower to mature. It's older when it goes to market. So I think for those getting into the industry, into the business, you have to be able to take that swing and say, look, I'm gonna get into this, and I may not have an animal that gets to market for 3 or 4 years here as I build a herd and then start to sell. The commodity prices, nobody's immune to that. And all the agricultural sectors are at the whim of how commodity prices bounce around. So anyway, I think those are some of our headwinds that we have as an organization. Trying to think if I missed anything. Some people would argue you need more and bigger, heavier infrastructure if you're going to get into the bison business. We thought that at first, and we overbuilt a lot of things. And as we've learned how to handle animals better, we've been able to get by with a lot lighter infrastructure and smaller fences and things like that. But working facilities still have to be pretty beefy. And maybe another piece of the difficulty is they have a lot of wild traits in them still, even though they're privately owned. They're essentially a wild animal, which has some benefits, like they calve on their own. You aren't going to go out and pull a calf, but also they're when you put them on feed, they're anxious and penned up, and you can see that come through in lower gains, and that's another one. Just naturally, even if they're calm and protected, they gain slower. So you don't put weight on them as fast. So all of those things are things we found as challenges and things we've had to work with over the years to figure out. So like I already talked about the commercial feed yards, it was just untenable at some point when we were losing 3 to 8% of our animals in a commercial feed yard, and that's why we went to feeding our own animals on our own places, and we're able to solve that problem. But so just the maturity, the how fast the animal matures, the wildness of the animal, the diseases, the size of the market, all of the knowledge base that's out there. I think the agriculture sector in general has trouble hiring employees, especially out in the ranching world. We have found that maybe the applicant pool is cut even further because people are just averse or curious, won't come to a bison ranch. So it's they want to work in the beef industry and won't even think about applying for work on a bison ranch or something like that. So recruiting and retaining employees has been a challenge as well.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Steve. It's a good one. He said, "Do you publish research results from the Institute, and where could we find them?"
We do. I'm proud of the work we've been able to do in the 3.5 or so short years since we formed the Institute. I feel like we've we've been pretty successful in getting our studies done and getting the work published. They're typically in scientific journals. A lot of masters, we fund a lot of students that help do our work. So masters and PhDs, theses and things like that. We are currently revamping our website, but all of that work will be on our website in the near future. The Turner Institute, you could search the Turner Institute of Eco Agriculture and it would be there. You could also reach out directly to me. I'd be happy to send you a bibliography of the work that we've published so far, but and then all of the it's in various scientific journals. So I couldn't say go look at Meat Science and you'd find all our work there, but there's work published now in 15 or 20 different lines of scientific journals. So a lot of different ways, but certainly would be happy to share that in the most convenient way I can.
Awesome. And I think when we wrap this up, we'll get some more information from you on best way to contact and all of that. So I have a closing question to ask you. I'll pause for a second again, just to see if anybody else has anything they would like to ask before I go ahead with that. All right. So, and obviously if anybody does, feel free to weigh in. So you clearly have dedicated your career, so much of your work to conservation and to restoring native species. So when you stand in a pasture and you watch a herd of bison today, what are you thinking about? What are you thinking that you want this to look like 25 years from now? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I come back probably to, since I got to write I got to propose the research topics that the Institute might want to focus on as we were forming our Institute and trying to put some of that down on paper. And I already mentioned those. Of course, we want to help promote the bison industry. So learn about meat science and animal welfare and all those sorts of things. And then the second topic is the imperiled species and conservation. And then thirdly, kind of these ecological outcomes. So when I stand out there in the pasture today, I probably would have answered this different 10 years ago, but when I stand out there today, I'm really fascinated by and interested in how is that animal interacting with the landscape, and why are they making certain decisions about what they need to do. And for example, I just this morning got a project report from a colleague at South Dakota State University that put some GPS collars on bison at our McGinley Ranch in Nebraska, and is just now compiling some of that data. And he was looking at how do bison use a managed landscape, for example. So it's not like you can just understand how a bison is going to move, because they can only move as far as the fence allows them. And so when they're in a given pasture of a given size and water is distributed in a certain way, how do they use that landscape, that pasture, for the days they're in that pasture? And it's fascinating. One of the things that he reported was, this is in Nebraska, so of course it's a well-watered landscape in the sandhills. So there's lots of wetlands and ponds they can go to. But we always thought that bison would prefer cleaner, clearer water that you can get from a well. So we have a lot of wells out there, as most ranchers do. But they didn't, on average, they didn't even go to a well once every 4 days. They were getting their water requirements in different ways from the landscape. They were using the natural water, or they were getting it from forage. And there's so many things we don't understand. We think, based on our observation on our ranches, that they'll go further from water than a beef cow will, for example. That they like the ridges as opposed to the riparian areas, as opposed to beef cattle. That they move a lot more during the day than a cow does, or a horse does, or a goat does. And so we get movement information from those collars. And on average, a bison moves about 10 kilometers a day, or 6.5 miles a day, just in their normal habit in a managed landscape. So that's just one small example of the things that I'm interested in as I look at that animal. How do we set our landscapes up and use that animal in a way that meets their needs and protects animal welfare, but also does good by the landscape and the forage and the soil and the water in all these systems, that a lot of them significantly impacted over the years from past agricultural activities or human activities, that we can try to improve the landscape. So I'm really just trying to understand that animal as a tool in a way to meet our other objectives as an organization as well.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, one more question from the group here. Susan asked, what is the vaccine protocol for bison on the Turner Ranch?
Good question. It can vary. And I'm not going to be able to list all of those off the top of my head. We will, depending on where the ranch is, vaccinate for different things like pink eye, mycoplasma, brucellosis. We will deworm based on, we don't deworm as a matter of fact. We typically will get stool samples and understand what the parasite loads are before we make a decision to deworm. They do give a couple other vaccinations that I'm not going to be able to remember the name of, common ones. I think there's a 3-way one, if I remember right. But brucellosis, and we found, just to be clearly on, straight up honest, some of those we're not convinced are having a lot of positive impact. Brucellosis and mycoplasma, for example, would be two that our evidence would suggest probably aren't having any beneficial impact in our herds. So sorry, I can't answer that. Our vet would be able to answer that a lot more cleanly than I can, but that's a little bit about it.
All right, great. So I will pause for one more second to see if any more questions come in. This has been very informative, at least for me. I'm sure it has for everybody else as well. While we wait for any more questions to come in, I will ask if there's anything else, Dr. Kruse, that you want to mention. We can definitely talk about that now, but also if folks have questions, if they want to get in touch with you, learn more about the research that you're doing, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, feel free to reach out. My email is best if you'd like me to send you documents or anything like that. And it's my name. My name shows up on my screen, at least. Hopefully it does on all your screens, but it's carter.kruse@retranches.com. So CARTER.KRUSE at RETRANCHES.com. Carter.Kruse@retranches.com. And absolutely feel free to reach out. My phone number is 406-581-0007. And that's a great way to text me, to email you as well, or anything like that. So, or feel free to call. And again, the Institute does have a slightly outdated website at this point, which they're working on updating, but that just search the Turner Institute of Eco-Agriculture, and you'll be able to find that. And I guess I would just close by, and I see there's one more question I'd be happy to answer, but just close by saying, I know there's been some question around what's going to happen to our organization now that Mr. Turner has passed away. And I think the short answer is that his family, we will now be directed and led by a family board, which will be made up of his children. And they are excited to continue their father's legacy and put their own kind of stamp on it as we move forward, certainly into this research world, but also kind of looking at the supporting and maintaining our work in the bison industry as well as native and imperiled species. So we're not going anywhere, and hopefully we'll continue to contribute in a positive way.
Well, and I think we're all very glad to hear that. We do have the one last question. I've got like 3 minutes before my recording shuts off. So if we want to run through that really quickly, GPS collar work, what percentage of the herd wears a collar?
We had collared 45 adult cows only in a herd of probably 800 breeding cows or something like that. And it really was a proof of concept. They were in-house designed collars, because GPS collars can get expensive if you put a bunch of them out. And we really put them on the animals to see if we could actually get 2 years out of them both from a function perspective as well as will the animal just tear them up and rub them off on fences and things like that. So that was a success. And so we were able to get some of this landscape decisions. And now we're going to go back and say, okay, we know we can collar them for up to 2 years. Now let's get a bigger sample size out there, and let's ask the landscape questions in a maybe a more scientific manner than we did. So lots to come on that front.
All right. Awesome. I am going to close things out here. Dr. Kruse, thank you so much. You have been a wealth of information. I think we had some really good questions from everybody who is on the call today too. We will have this posted online if anybody wants to refer back to it later. I also put your email, I think I typed it correctly. I put your email right in the chat so folks have it there as well if they have any follow-up questions.
If I can find the chat real quick, I'll look, but I can't. Oh, there it is. You got it. That's perfect.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who hopped on today. Hope everyone has a good rest of the day.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.